Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. When a new author comes into my view, several scenarios may unfold. They range from complete lack of interest to unlimited trust and everything in between. The first scenario is obviously the easiest. I look the writer up on internet and decide that her or his work is not for me. When for whatever reason a new author instantly gains my trust, I tend to buy her or his entire works, even when I have not read anything yet. This usually turns out all right, but occasionally my trust should not have been given out so readily. My relationship with Kurt Vonnegut remains as of yet undecided. In October of 2014, I came across his name, and because Vonnegut was recommended to me by a highly regarded friend, I felt that I could certainly enjoy his novels. So, I bought all of them over the span of 3 months at good old Book Depository. 40 novels and a collection of his letters. In January of 2015, I read his most famous book, Slaughterhouse-Five, which absolutely confirmed my trust. I loved it. In my reading experience of that time, I write, very impressive. I read Slaughterhouse-Five in one go. Although it is an inconspicuously small book, there is an awful lot to say about it. In fact, the impact it had on me is impossible to convey in this reading experience. Everything in this little book refers to everything. I'm afraid I'm going to have to read an entire oeuvre again. Despite my enthusiastic introduction to this writer, it took me almost 2 years before I picked up another of his novels. I read Breakfast of Champions in October of 2016 and wasn't quite sure what to think of it. My reading experience says, "This is a rather bizarre book and I'm torn between enthusiasm and irritation. I recognize how incredibly crafty it is composed, but much of the absurdism got on my nerves. There is beauty, deep wisdom. Yes, I admire this writer, but my reservations are also there." Since reading this novel, I had left the remaining 13 Vonneguts on my shelves in their slumber. Regularly I pulled one out, contemplating if I should read it, and invariably put it back again. Until I met Erik from Gronskei Books on BookTube. Our book channels have a completely different focus, which to me is exactly why I like his channel so much. Erik reminds me of the reader I was before I got swept away by fantasy. We agreed to read some Vonnegut together and decided upon Cat's Cradle. For me a first, and for Erik a reread. Let me first share with you my reading experience of this small book of 206 pages, which I read between 3 and 12 May. It was first published in 1963 and is called a satirical exploration of science, religion and humanity. Nothing more and nothing less. The narrator, John or Jonah, is working on a book about the day the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. During his research, he gets involved with the children of Dr. Felix Honecker, the so-called inventor of the atomic bomb and a Nobel laureate. He discovers another invention by Honecker called Ice 9. This mysterious substance freezes water instantly, which is potentially catastrophic. Should all the world's water freeze, life on Earth would end. His research leads him to the fictional island of San Lorenzo in the Caribbean, where he learns about Bokononism, a religion that Jonah converts to. The first sentence in the Book of Bokonon is as follows: "All of the true things I am about to tell you are shameless lies." That immediately caught my attention. I love it when the truth is exposed for what it really is. The story is told in hindsight, so when Jonah begins writing this memoir, he already is a Bokononist. But at the beginning of his story, he isn't yet. More than once he thinks on how he would have responded to events had he been a Bokononist at the time. Like when a cab driver makes a detour to visit his mother's grave, and later on the driver makes a second detour to a tombstone salesroom. I wasn't a Bokononist then, so I agreed with some peevishness. As a Bokononist, of course, I would have agreed gaily to go anywhere anyone suggested. As Bokonon says, peculiar travel suggestions are dancing lessons from God. That is absolutely beautiful. The intricate way Vonnegut composes his book can be illustrated with the phrase, "as it happens." We are first alerted to this phrase on page 60. As it happens, as it was supposed to happen, Bokonon would say. From then on, every occurrence of "as it happens" reminded me of that nothing truly happens by accident. Vonnegut lets no opportunity unused to illustrate the complete senselessness of war. One of them is when Jonah asks about the story behind the name of the Boulevard of the 100 Martyrs to Democracy. After Pearl Harbor, the island of San Lorenzo selected 100 young men who were to be trained in the US. They never even arrived there because they all drowned after a German torpedo hit their boat just as it was leaving the harbor. After the final page, I made the following note. Depressingly nihilistic. Every page breathes the stupidity and viciousness of mankind. Vonnegut takes cynicism to a whole new level. What sticks with me is that image of utter hopelessness for mankind. I most certainly recognize his brilliant writing, but this is no longer my go-to genre. I can appreciate it and I can see its quality, but it no longer inspires me. The book got me thinking about why literary fiction is no longer my preferred genre to read. As you may or may not know, I have read many hundreds of books in that genre, and even though in all those years I have found many literary gems, in January of 2023 I decided to devote most of my reading time to fantasy. My relationship with literature with a capital L is complicated, to say the least. I not very successfully tried to explain this in an email to Erik. I'd like to give it another try here. First of all, I gave Cat's Cradle 79 points out of 100, even though rating it feels stupid. This book, in a way, makes me all the more aware of the way I have changed as a reader over these past 10 odd years. Like in many literary books, Cat's Cradle entangles me in the unpleasant feeling that I'm taking part in an intellectual competition, as if the author is speaking to me, saying, "Look at me being intelligent and mysterious over here," to which I'm supposed to answer something like, "Yes, and I am smart enough to understand all of this." Let me emphasize very strongly that this is how I experience this. By no means am I saying that this is the intention of writers of literary fiction. I myself have published 2 novels in the genre of literary fiction, so I should be guilty of fueling this competition of the intellect as well. Although, in my defense, I didn't do so knowingly. Reading Cat's Cradle reminded me of how literature for me always held that element of competition. To try and explain why that is, I have to go back to my childhood. I will try to be brief and not turn this video into a psychiatric consultation. My father, who passed away in 1993, was a blue-collar worker who probably was frustrated about his station in society. His older brother got a college degree and acted the successful one of the family, seriously bullying my father about it. Being a highly intelligent and ambitious young man, life turned out different for my father. After having tried to start his own business a couple of times, he married at a young age, and when children arrived, he was pressed to take a job, a blue-collar job. Unable to work at his intellectual capacity and sensitive to his low station on the societal ladder, his frustration grew. By the time I made my entry into this life, my father had divided the world into two kinds of people. One, us, our kind, the lowlifes, and two, they, them, the others, the successful ones. His go-to saying was, "If you're born a dime, you'll never be a quarter." Next to this lame view, my father also relentlessly hammered home how our kind was too stupid to understand any form of art, be it literature or classical music. These were made for the others, the sophisticated and educated people, but most certainly not for us. I was deeply indoctrinated by this division in humanity. From since I could read, I devoured books. As a kid, I had collected all 15 books of the Dutch version of The Five Findouters by Enid Blyton. Next to that, I had some 4 or 5 books of the popular Dutch book series called The Chameleon, about 2 farm boys who had the wildest adventures with their self-built but extremely fast motorboat, after which the series was titled. These and a couple of other children's books I read over and over again. When I got hold of a literary book for the first time, I didn't even dare read it for a long time. I kept it well hidden in the back of my drawers. It was a very small book by a Dutch author who by now is largely forgotten. When I read it later on, it mainly disappointed me. This background, paired with my own rather headstrong character, made me want to be an outlier. I would show my father that this dime would turn into a quarter. So, against my father's wish, I went to university where I studied Dutch and English, and I befriended intellectuals who were writers or musicians or artists in another fashion. In my first year in Amsterdam, I bought my first LPs of classical music, another of those arts that was not meant for our kind. I absolutely loved it, and it was the starting point for my extensive exploration of the vast landscape of classical music. And obviously, I read nothing but the highest literary books. Moreover, I was going to be a writer myself. During my study, I befriended one of my professors, who was an established author. He sort of took me on as his apprentice, and our friendship grew during its 20 years. Unfortunately, we had a severe falling out a couple of years before his passing. No need to go into that here, but I mention this friendship because not only was it very important and formative for me, it also taught me in the end that snobism and superior behavior do not belong to me. My friend most definitely was a snob and regarded himself as superior to everyone who enjoyed the so-called lesser arts. His opinion on Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings, for instance, was extremely condescending and insulting. For many years I went along with this attitude, believing that was how things were supposed to be. But gradually his patronizing behavior repelled me. I distinctly remember one of the last times we went out for dinner that he looked around the fully occupied restaurant and disdainfully announced, "Nobody here is any good." Fast forward some 30 years, up until say 2005, I shamelessly indulged myself in reading literature. When in 2007 I finally allowed myself to read thrillers and some science fiction, it almost felt like sacrilege. I realized that these genres that were generally regarded as less or lower than literature didn't bother me with this drive or competition for intelligence display, something I mostly had been unaware of until that point. And upon realizing that, I understood how that element had always turned a blind eye to the enjoyment of reading books. Books had to be intellectually challenging. And although I love an intellectual challenge, that no longer is my main focus when reading a book. I apologize for this lengthy detour. Let's get back to Kurt Vonnegut and Cat's Cradle. Talking about the enjoyment of reading a book, I certainly experienced that this time around. An uneducated guess, I really enjoyed about 60 of the 206 pages. I loved the author's composition and meticulous prose, which leaves no word unaccounted for. Every detail is painstakingly part of the whole. I also very much enjoyed the cynicism and making fun of religion as a concept. The exposure of the idiocy of how power and war-crazy mankind truly is also was to my liking. This, 60 out of 200 plus pages, may sound like a low score, but it really isn't. I didn't rate the book with 79 points out of 100 for nothing. Every book has a number of pages that simply, or less simple, bring the story or the world building along and don't necessarily invoke any deep emotion. I estimate that some 80 to 90 pages in Cat's Cradle belong in that category. The remaining 50 to 60 pages of this book revived that sophistication race inside of me, which I do not like. Searching for the meaning of a turn in the story, or perhaps references I no doubt have missed, or the dancing around the meaning of the title, the exact hide and seek in words that sometimes defines literature. A book can be intelligent, sophisticated, or highly artistic, but as soon as I get the feeling that the author is trying to convey something without actually saying what it is, I feel like I'm being tested. Am I smart enough to find out what this riddle is, or what the hidden message is here? It reminds me of one of the most famous lines in Dutch poetry. Lees maar, staat niet wat staat. Just read it. It doesn't say what it says. Then why not simply say what you want to say, preferably in a beautiful, or if need be, in a poetic way? I am fully aware that this has to do with my background, with me. And I'm also fully aware that a treasure that is hard won can gain in value. I am familiar with the gratification of digging up the treasure from a text. But somehow it seems as if all this striving and reaching for no longer applies to me. It's fine if you want to hide your higher message or meaning in shrouds and mystification. I just don't want to make a study of a book to finally get to that gem anymore. There is much, much more I could say and would want to say about this subject, but I have been talking long enough already. At the end of this experience, I definitely want to read more Vonnegut, but I am in no hurry to do so. Right now, with major life changes taking shape, I'm not in the appropriate state of mind to read intricate and demanding books. Normally, I do not shy away from a good reading challenge, but for now, I'll stick with fast and easy reading. A good and entertaining story in prose that, in the meantime, titillates my artistic senses. Because, let's be honest, the snobbish tendencies are not altogether strange to me as well. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.